People think that working at a veterinary clinic in a small mountain town means a lot of routine checkups, spaying and neutering, maybe the occasional porcupine quill removal or swallowed sock. And they're not wrong. But every now and then, something happens that reminds you why you became a vet in the first place. Something that tightens your chest, kicks your heart into overdrive, and leaves you lying awake at night, wondering what might have happened if. This is the story I tell every new intern on their first winter rotation at Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic. It's the story of a husky named Nico. It was the kind of storm that shuts everything down. One of those freak blizzards that rolls in faster than the radar can track, swallowing the sun and dropping the temperature so quickly it feels like the world is exhaling its last breath. By the time the snow started falling that morning, our clinic had already rescheduled half the day's appointments. The power flickered twice before noon. Outside, the wind howled like something alive. My technician, Kara, kept checking the Doppler and murmuring things like, historic low, and, record wind chill, which are never things you want to hear when you're responsible for an entire building full of animals. By 5 o'clock, the town was effectively buried. Plows were pulled off the roads. The mayor issued a stay-in-place order. And I, Dr. Elena Hayes, was about to lock up the clinic for the night when the phone rang. It was Marshall Kane, the deputy fire chief. His voice was crackly and low, barely audible over the static of what I assumed was a failing cell signal. "We got a dog," he said. "Found it near the river trail. Barely moving. Looks bad." That was all I needed to hear. We prepped the back room with heating pads, warmed saline, and a thick layer of towels. Kara stayed with me, she always did when things got dicey. She didn't say much, just moved with the quiet intensity of someone who'd done this before. 20 minutes later, we heard the fire engine pull up. What they carried in was more bundle than dog. A shivering, barely conscious mass wrapped in a wool blanket soaked with melting snow. Only the tip of a black nose and 2 frost-rimmed ears peeked out. "Found him near dead," Marshall said, his beard crusted with ice. "Must have been out there all day." "Any tags?" I asked, as I started peeling the blanket away. He shook his head. That was the first time I saw Nico. He was a husky, maybe 2 years old, though it was hard to tell with his coat frozen stiff and matted with snow. His paws were swollen and pale, the pads cracked and graying with early frostbite. His ears were worse, one already turning black at the tips. His temperature was dangerously low. Eyes dull, breathing shallow. If he hadn't been brought in when he wouldn't have made it another hour. "He's going to need active warming," I told Kara. "Get the bear hugger. Let's start slow, blankets, warm fluids, and keep the lights low. I'll spare you the technicalities. Warming a dog in that condition is a process that takes hours. Too fast, and you risk rewarming shock. Too slow, and the organs shut down." Every 15 minutes we checked his temperature, his pulse, his capillary refill time. He drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally letting out a soft, warbling whine that nearly undid us both. But there was fight in him. Even in that weakened state, Nico had the heart of a survivor. I remember the exact moment his eyes locked onto mine, clear blue, clouded by pain but still alert, and I thought, this one's coming back. We stayed with him through the night. I called in Dr. Felix from the next town over to help monitor his vitals while we focused on managing his pain and circulation. The clinic was dark, save for the battery-powered lanterns and a string of emergency lights flickering like will-o'-the-wisps along the hallway. Outside, the storm continued its fury. Inside, we worked in whispers, as if the slightest noise might tip the balance one way or the other. Around 3 a.m., he licked Kara's hand. It was such a small gesture. Just a flick of the tongue against her glove, but I saw the tears spring to her eyes immediately. "He's thanking you," she whispered. "No," I said, barely keeping my own voice steady. "He's fighting." By sunrise, his temperature had climbed from 90 to 97 degrees, still hypothermic, but stable. He'd taken a few laps of warm water, even managed to lift his head when we said his name. We started calling him Nico halfway through the night, it just felt right. The tips of his ears were a worry, and his back left paw might not make it. But for the first time, we let ourselves believe he might actually survive. Later that morning, after we'd transferred him to a heated kennel and the snow outside finally stopped falling, I stepped into the front office for some air. That's when I saw it, an old bulletin board near the door, cluttered with missing pet notices. And there he was, a picture of a husky, tongue lolling, eyes blazing with mischief. The caption read, "Lost. Nico, male husky, blue eyes, very friendly. Last seen near River Trail. Please help bring him home." I took a deep breath. The story wasn't over. Not yet. It wasn't until the next day that I learned the full extent of Nico's story. As the storm cleared and the roads slowly reopened, people began to emerge from their homes, eager to dig out from under the snow. By the afternoon, our clinic was flooded with calls from worried locals trying to track down their lost pets. Nico's owners were among them. Maggie Lawson, a tall woman with wild red hair and a thick scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, was the first to arrive. She had been searching for Nico for over a day. She told us how he had run off the morning before the storm, chasing after a deer along the river trail. The two of them had been inseparable since she adopted him from a rescue 2 years ago. He was a bit of a troublemaker, always pulling at the leash, always trying to chase after something, but that was part of what made him special. When she saw him lying there, barely recognizable from the frostbite and exhaustion, her face crumpled, and I could see the horror in her eyes. I've seen that look on the faces of so many pet owners, the moment they realize their companion has been through something truly life-threatening. "Is he going to make it?" Maggie asked, her voice trembling. She reached out to touch Nico's muzzle, now slightly warmer to the touch. He looked up at her through half-lidded eyes, his gaze still dull, but the recognition in his expression was unmistakable. Nico gave a soft whine, and Maggie's tears began to fall. I smiled, although I was wary of how much hope to give. "He's a fighter, Maggie. He's fighting for you." That was when the hard part began. When you're working with frostbite on an animal, you're never sure what you're going to get. The body responds to cold trauma in unpredictable ways. The frozen areas of tissue, especially on the ears, tail, and paws, can become necrotic. If you're not careful, they can become infected and require amputation. Nico's ears, the most visibly affected area, were still a huge concern. We started him on a course of antibiotics to stave off infection, and I prescribed pain medication to ease his suffering. We wrapped his feet in gauze, carefully monitoring his blood flow. He couldn't bear weight on his left paw, and even the smallest movement caused him to wince in pain. But Nico didn't give up. Not for a second. We kept him on strict bed rest for the next few days, allowing his body to heal while we managed his care. His temperature finally stabilized, hovering around a safe 99 degrees Fahrenheit, but the road ahead was uncertain. It wasn't just a matter of surviving the frostbite, it was about keeping him comfortable, about preventing further damage, about showing him that not all humans were going to let him freeze alone in a snowstorm. In the days that followed, something magical happened. Nico's personality began to shine through again. He became more alert, more aware. His appetite returned. We fed him soft food at first. His stomach had been through a lot, but soon, he was devouring meals with the same eager enthusiasm he had when Maggie first adopted him. He'd still flinch at the slightest touch to his sore ears, but he'd also nudge our hands, asking for attention. I remember the day he first stood up on his own. It was day 6 after the storm, and Kara and I were sitting at the desk, going through some paperwork when we heard a soft scrabble behind us. Nico was standing on all fours, his eyes bright with determination. He tried to take a step forward. His back leg wobbled, but he caught himself. "Come on, boy," I murmured, standing up slowly. "You've got this." He took another step, then another. His left paw, the one with the worst frostbite, was still tender and swollen, but he managed to stand tall, lifting his head like he was showing the world that he wasn't going to be knocked down so easily. It wasn't just his body that was recovering, his spirit was coming back, too. Every day, I could see his trust growing. Maggie visited him twice a day, sitting with him for hours, stroking his fur, talking to him in that soft, reassuring voice that all dogs seem to recognize. He would wag his tail weakly, but each wag seemed to say more than words could. But there was something I noticed that was different about Nico than any other case I'd treated before. The moment he realized he was going to survive, he stopped fighting us. He relaxed, trusting us more and more each day. It was as if the trauma of the storm had shown him just how fragile life could be, and now he was willing to let us help him, to accept that we were his chance to heal. It wasn't just the frostbite that worried us anymore. It was his psyche, his pain, his exhaustion. It had to have been emotionally taxing. How could a dog not feel the weight of being abandoned to the cold, exposed to nature's fury without his pack, without his person? 3 days after Nico's first steps, I started the process of getting him into physical therapy. It was gentle at first, massage and light exercises to get the blood flowing properly again. I could see Nico flinch at times, but I also saw the fire in his eyes. He was determined to walk again. He would limp along the clinic's halls, sometimes making it halfway to the front door before needing a break, but each day he made progress. His tail would wag when we praised him, and his eyes sparkled with mischief again, just like before. He had a long way to go, but I was starting to believe that the Nico I had first seen, barely breathing and frozen to the bone, wasn't the real Nico at all. The real Nico was strong, resilient, and full of life. And he wasn't giving up. But then came the news I wasn't ready for. Maggie came in one morning, her face pale, eyes hollow. He's not mine anymore, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It took me a moment to process Maggie's words. He's not yours anymore? I repeated, half expecting her to clarify. But there was no mistaking the hollow look in her eyes, the quiet, resigned way she stood there, staring at Nico. Maggie swallowed hard before speaking again. I can't keep him. Not after what happened. I don't deserve him. I stood there, my heart dropping. I had watched Nico go from a frostbitten, barely conscious dog to the feisty, energetic husky that was now wagging his tail weakly at her feet. The thought of her walking away from him, especially after everything they'd been through together, made my chest tighten with something that felt a lot like heartbreak. I wasn't sure what to say. My voice was caught in my throat, the words swirling but not landing. But Nico, as if sensing the tension, stood up slowly, leaning heavily on his good leg. His eyes flickered from Maggie to me, confused, as if asking what was happening, why his person wasn't holding him close like usual. I don't know if I can take care of him anymore, Maggie said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I've been struggling with everything, and I don't think I'm strong enough. Not for him. I've been to so many appointments lately, physical therapy for myself, therapy for the anxiety I've been dealing with, and I don't think I can offer him what he needs. I walked over to Maggie and placed a hand on her shoulder. Maggie, we can work through this. We can help you. Nico's not a lost cause. You are strong enough. But the more I looked at her, the more I realized she wasn't just talking about herself. She was talking about Nico, too. She was talking about how broken she felt, as if everything that had happened to them was her fault. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I gave Maggie space to process her feelings, while also making sure Nico's recovery was still on track. But there was an undercurrent of tension, one that hung in the clinic like an unspoken truth. Nico, who had already been through so much, now faced the prospect of losing the only home he knew. He still seemed uncertain when Maggie visited, looking at her as though waiting for reassurance, as though he was still holding on to the hope that things could go back to the way they were before. As Nico's paws slowly healed, we began to talk more openly with Maggie about the possibility of rehoming him. But the more we talked, the clearer it became that Maggie wasn't going to be able to provide the stability Nico needed at this point in her life. Her health, both physical and emotional, had taken a toll on her ability to care for him in the way he deserved. It was heartbreaking to watch, because I could see how much she loved him. But sometimes love isn't enough, especially when you can't take care of yourself first. One afternoon, as I sat in my office reviewing Nico's records, Kara came in, holding a file. "Dr. Hayes, I've got someone you might want to meet," she said, her voice tentative. I followed her into the front lobby, where a middle-aged couple was sitting. The woman, short with a warm smile, stood up as we entered. "Hi," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Lena, and this is my husband, Jake. We called earlier about adopting Nico." I could feel the change in the room instantly. Maggie was there too, her shoulders hunched in a way that showed she was barely holding herself together. She hadn't spoken much in the last few days. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the turmoil between her love for Nico and her guilt over what was best for him. Lena and Jake were genuine in their kindness. They listened patiently as we explained Nico's condition and recovery process. They asked about his behavior, his quirks, his likes and dislikes. I could tell they were serious about adopting him. Lena mentioned they had another husky, one who had passed away a few months ago after a long and happy life. They had been waiting for the right dog to come along, and they seemed to believe Nico was the one. I watched Nico carefully as they spoke. His tail wagged just a little at the mention of their other dog, and he tilted his head toward them with that curious spark I recognized. His eyes flickered between Lena and Jake, and for the first time since the storm, I saw something resembling trust in his gaze. The decision wasn't easy. It never is. I had grown so attached to Nico over the past week, and the thought of sending him home with someone else tugged at my heart. But I also knew that this wasn't just about me or Maggie anymore. It was about what Nico needed to thrive. And I could see it in his body language. He was ready for a new chapter. Maggie made the hardest decision of all. She chose to let him go. With tears in her eyes, she handed Nico's leash to Lena, who knelt down to his level, gently brushing the fur around his ears. Nico sniffed her hand and then licked her fingers, the connection instant. "Are you sure?" Maggie asked, her voice shaky. Lena smiled warmly. "We're sure. We'll give him the best home we can." And just like that, Nico was no longer a part of our clinic. Lena and Jake loaded him into their car, and as they drove away, I watched from the clinic door, feeling both the loss and the relief. Nico would be all right. He had survived the storm, the frostbite, and the uncertainty. Now, he was on his way to a new life. 3 months later, I received a letter from Lena. It was a simple note, a photo attached of Nico standing proudly in the snow, his coat thick and his tail high. He looked like the same dog that had come into the clinic in that blanket, but there was a confidence in his stance that hadn't been there before. "Nico is thriving with us," Lena's letter read. "He loves our yard, and we've started him on agility training. He's back to his old self, full of energy, full of life. We can't thank you enough for giving us the chance to help him heal." And though I had never felt more certain of Nico's new home, part of me would always remember that night he was brought in, shivering and near death. In some ways, it felt like Nico's story had started the day he was found, frozen and alone in the snow, but in reality, it had just begun. Because the thing about animals like Nico is that they teach us what resilience really means. And when you're lucky enough to witness that kind of recovery, that kind of love, you know that no storm is too big to survive.